things just got a lot more interesting thanks to the newest 1.6 update, and these are the 5 characters that are now better than ever. If you are keeping a close eye on update announcements and news in general, then you probably know there were some changes made to Elemental Mastery, and some of the characters that got affected by this newest change got significantly better, while others at least improved in general. And the character who got a lot out of this newest buff is Sucrose, not just because she's now better, but also there's a higher possibility a lot of people have her unlocked and even some of our constellations. So now would be the best time to see what's up with this shy alchemist. So to make things as simple as possible, what basically happened to Elemental Mastery is that miHoYo decided to increase the damage of all the transformative reactions by simply changing up the numbers in the formula, and the end result is quite significant for those characters who can use swirl reactions. And the idea behind it is that swirl in itself, to be honest, sucks, but when you have it happening to more than one enemy and the swirl gets to jump around and multiply like a madman, then you get to have fun. And even if the numbers you see will never be a critical hit, with enough Elemental Mastery, you'll see how the enemy can get shredded to pieces by simply having a lot of swirls beating them senseless. Which brings us back to Sucrose. Before the 1.6 update, her primary role was to provide Elemental Mastery boosts for her teammates in team compositions, like Melt and Vaporize, while her own damage was something that was left to be desired, and even if she could cause good amount of it, it did require putting in a lot of resources into her if you wanted her to also act as your sub-damage dealer. Well, with the newest change that's now in the game, she's basically now able to do both of the roles at the same time, even if with not that much resource investment. For example, you can easily build her with Elemental Mastery on Sands and Circlet, and leave Anemo damage on her Goblet, but it also doesn't hurt going all in with Elemental Mastery instead. And when it comes to weapons, you can go for as cheap as a Magic Guide, or upgrade and use Mapamare, but even better would be Sacrificial Fragments, which not only provides her with a much needed substat, but also gives you a chance to create additional reactions with her elemental skill, especially if you haven't unlocked her first constellation. Now, ideally, getting a full set of Viridescent Venereer is an amazing addition for her, which right now became even more ridiculous due to how the 4 set provides 60% additional damage to an already beefed up swirl reaction, not to mention taking away 40% of enemies' resistance counts as a major damage increase when you look at the transformative reaction formula. But the problem obviously is going to be the Elemental Mastery main stat you need to find on Viridescent Sands, Goblet, and Circlet, and these last 2 mentioned pieces in particular have a small chance to drop from the domains, so worst case scenario, you can go for 2 of them which have Elemental Mastery in their main stat, and use the last one as any of the other traditional main stat you would use, like attack percentage. Still, optimizing the build is just one thing that makes her awesome, because when you take a look at some of the teams the community have used in the past, like Chongyun's Melt comp, you can see a drastic improvement in her own sub-damage dealer role, while other teams like Electro Charge can even be more beneficial, since not only will she provide a boost in this stat to her teammates, but also other reactions deal much more damage than before. So in essence, Sucrose's potential and accessibility has been improved in major ways, and while finding some of the artifacts with the much needed stat is going to be random at best, at least there's more damage you can squeeze out even with her traditional build without making any changes at all. But this is just one character that got affected by the buff, and this next one is definitely the most surprising. Hope you were good with returning those library books, because getting shocked by Lisa isn't something you want to happen, especially after 1.6 update. Now, if the statistics don't lie, then she definitely fits the role of a librarian who doesn't get to see much sunlight, since a lot of you seem to be not using her in team compositions, which isn't a big deal, but perhaps these new changes might convince you to give her at least a shot. First of all, she's one of the few characters who has Elemental Mastery as her Ascension stat, which isn't the biggest number you can get, but it still acts as a nice backup for damage. However, the spotlight goes to the 2 reactions, Overload and Electro Charged, and without beating around the bush too much, even if the damage got increased, mechanically, these 2 reactions still have their own set of problems that need to be addressed. Let's start with the good news. Overload damage can get really big, really fast, depending on how much you're willing to invest and build around it, but even with a fully dedicated Elemental Mastery Lisa, you can hit most enemies for 12,000 at level 80 and 16,000 at level 90 at roughly 1,000 Elemental Mastery. And you could go for even more fun experiments and start adding things like resistance shredding by using Gooba if you have a first constellation Xiangling, or Zhongli's Jade Shield, or even Viridescent Venereer debuff combined together with Traveler's final constellation. Heck, at this point you can even combine everything together and marvel at 26,000 overload damage. But the reality is, this is just fun stuff you can do in a vacuum, but when you've got Geo Bishops and other agile and more importantly, small enemies running around, that knockback effect from overload is annoying to deal with to say the least. So even if the damage has been improved, using it to the fullest potential will require either playing around the knockback effect from from Overload or using Venti, who is the only one that can keep the enemies in place after the reaction occurs. Also, because you want this reaction to hit for a ton of damage, it's best to build Lisa as a fully committed Elemental Mastery user, meaning all artifacts on her weapon need to use the stat, and while this isn't a big deal since it's the stat that matters and not the artifact sets or passives from the weapon, getting Thundering Fury is a step up for even bigger Overload damage. Still, Lisa now has a second option to go for as a damage dealer, and instead of trying to rely on the traditional critical damage and rate, which definitely have their own set of problems when trying to balance them, one thing to keep in mind is that if you do build her the new way, you can practically ignore her talent levels since her damage is tied to the transformative reaction that does not get impacted by anything besides Lisa's level and her Elemental Mastery. Now for the bad news, even if Electro Charge deals damage twice as much as before, trying to apply it is laughable, because with someone like Xingqiu, you need to find time for a very small window when the Hydro Swords from the burst will get superseded with Lisa's normal attack, and then it will take into account her as the one who causes the reaction, because otherwise, you will see pitiful reaction damage numbers since the game treats Xingqiu as the one who caused the Electro Charged. And because other Hydro characters are Barbara, Mona, and Child, all of which can help with reactions, they're best utilized in other situations, which sadly leaves Lisa's Electro Charged approach almost unchanged even if the damage got improved. Overall, while Lisa is not the most popular character out there, she definitely got a nice boost in damage if you decide to build her with Overload reaction in mind, and since you won't need regular artifacts that you use in any other damage dealer, not to mention you can even ignore her talent levels, she could be an interesting option to go for or at least stick around with until you can unlock her name card. You know the saying that the rich just keep getting richer the more time goes on? Well, it seems to be that miHoYo decided to apply this philosophy to one of the most broken characters since the game's launch, and this tone-deaf bard couldn't be more happier about it. And as we previously discussed Sucrose's new potential, Venti got even more out of this new update, which to begin with, he never needed any help in being stronger. However, there's definitely some amazing things worth mentioning, and the general first impressions show that Elemental Mastery Venti build is now the best way to go for if you're planning to go up against more than one enemy, which, let's be honest, this is Venti's bread and butter anyway. So first of all, when it comes to weapons, Wind Blue Mode, a free-to-play bow from 1.4 limited time event, is now pretty insane on him, but the next best thing you can equip with is the Stringless, which, as many theory crafters have already reported, it basically beats even a 5-star weapon at first refinement level. But obviously, the thing that makes him thrive with Elemental Mastery is the Burst. Since it will cause that reaction so many times, you can probably imagine the newly improved formula kicking in and kicking the enemy's butts. In fact, you don't even need to go for a fully committed Elemental Mastery build, and you can mix and match things depending on your own situation, but a nice and a well-rounded build that you can use is Elemental Mastery on Sands and Circlet, while you keep the Anemo damage on Goblet, provided you're able to get the Force Hit bonus from Viridescent artifacts. And that's pretty much the new and improved Venti, if that doesn't already sound crazy enough. A new way has opened up to build them aside from the traditional builds we've been used to, and now that Elemental Mastery can even be a better option than anything else is an amazing thing, provided you can get lucky enough with the artifact domain, but at least on the bright side, you get to abuse those treasure hunters and Fatui agents with endless bursts. If you've been following this video closely enough and heard that Overload got improved, then you know what that means for the other side of Electro. That's right, when you thought this was supposed to give a buff to some less stronger elements, it seems to be keeping Pyro away from even getting more stronger is not something miHoYo is able to do. So now, even getting Elemental Mastery on some of the damage dealers like Li, Yanfei, Xiangling, and even Benny Boy is an option, or at least an interesting consideration. Now, as previously mentioned, Overload is best used together with characters like Venti, who can keep the enemies from getting knocked back, or at least going up against bigger targets who won't budge from the explosion, but it's definitely not recommended to go too deep into Elemental Mastery, and keeping a couple of hundred of it will cause a nice amount of Overload damage, but you still need to focus on other things like critical rate and damage, as well as high talent levels to get the mix of regular damage and reactions. Also, it's fair to say that Pyro and Electro aren't the most common combinations in teams, and the reality is that if you're doing Spiral Abyss, this is more than likely a strategy you would use on your second team if you haven't fully built it. However, the end result is that for Pyro characters, especially those who can produce the element status often, having Elemental Mastery on your artifact's substats is already good enough, even if it was previously already used for Melt and Vaporize, but now this basically covers all grounds. Still, if you decide to use Klee or Yanfei for Overload, it will be useful in some scenarios but not all, which is already an improvement when you're looking for more viable options. It's probably time to put on the tinfoil hats and talk about the real reason why Elemental Mastery got adjusted. So we know that Kazuha is coming out pretty soon, and he is an Anemo Sword user who, as from the previews we've seen, will be causing quite a few reactions just from the elemental skill alone, and because he won't get away with it like Xiao, who's basically a monstrous Anemo damage dealer, Kazuha is going to serve as a support damage dealer, and in order to avoid the next 1.1 incident us veterans have experienced, this fix or buff or however you call it, it did affect a lot of characters, but Kazuha is definitely going to be benefiting a lot from it. And while he is still not out and we don't know how well he will perform, it's always a slippery slope when it comes to support characters, especially 5 stars, because a lot of people expect to get a powerful unit when they pay real money for it. So maybe the developers taking the initiative and boosting the reactions, especially Swirl, is just a way to prepare for Kazuha's arrival, or maybe it is indeed a boost that we needed, but we will never know that for sure. Still, if you're planning to save up for Kazuha, his future seems to be bright enough when we speak in terms of damage potential, but we know that this samurai has captured a lot of our hearts already. The newest changes to Elemental Mastery is a welcome addition no matter how you look at it, and now even getting it from substats is a great thing to see, especially for characters who will be causing transformative reactions. And there have been some others which haven't been mentioned, like Fischl, Kaching, Anemo Traveler, and Jean, but it wasn't the biggest change you could talk about briefly. Still, it does feel like they've got stronger in their own ways. Now, the irony of course is that a lot of us expected this change to address the problem with Electro Element, but it's clear now that even if you improve the damage formula, it's the mechanics of Overload and Electro Charge that are at fault right now, and there aren't really that many characters who can manage their problematic nature aside from 1 or 2, so it really makes you think if this was just a small sample of what's to come more, especially now that Inazuma and its characters have been showcased by miHoYo, not to mention the Regent's Archon is going to be representing the element, so we just need to sit tight and see what's the next step in making Electro stronger. But if you enjoyed this video, be sure to gently press the like button and don't forget to subscribe to the channel by enabling the bell notifications on. It takes a lot of time and research just to make these videos, so your support means everything in helping out. You can also get more useful news and posts about Genshin by following this channel on Twitter, link in the description. Thanks for watching till the end and see you next time.